BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. BlackBoxNed88 on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And just a quick reminder, every Monday is Zodiac Mondays. Wednesday is an Ask Me Anything. That's an AMA, so please drop your questions below for things that you would like discussed here on the show. And Friday is an Anything Goes. Any subject is fair game, mostly talking about true crime, serial killers, the Zodiac Killer, but any subject is welcome. All right, so please share some ideas in the comment section about what you would like to hear about on this channel, and let's get started. Okay, hello everybody, and welcome to this special bonus episode of Black Box Online Radio. Today we're continuing with the 1981 murder of Joan Webster, and these are part of an ongoing series that has been happening on the channel, something that has turned into a deep dive podcast. And thank you to everybody who has been listening to these episodes. But if you are joining us for the first time to hear about the murder of Joan Webster, I think that this is an excellent starting point. If you want to follow along with these, there's a playlist here on this channel that has all of the episodes in order. Or if you just want to listen to this one as a standalone, that's fine too. Now's a great time to begin, because today is a Q&A session where I'm going to be reading off some questions and comments from many different people who are sharing their theories as well as the things that they believe happened to Joan Webster. The first point is that Joan Webster disappeared in 1981 after leaving Logan Airport in Boston, Massachusetts. She was traveling during Thanksgiving break. Joan Webster was a graduate student at Harvard studying architecture, and she was about to get into a taxi. Then all of a sudden, a man with a beard and rather disheveled hair approached her and asked her to switch vehicles, and then whatever happened between her and that man has mostly been lost to history. That is where the true mystery lies, and no one ever saw Joan for 9 straight years. I mean, it wasn't until 1990 that her remains were discovered, in Massachusetts, though, in a very rural area near a place called Tobacco Road. It was also near Tobacco Lake. Joan Webster had been stripped naked, her body was placed into a trash bag, and she had been buried. For years, the authorities were suggesting that she had been lured by the person who was driving possibly an illegal taxi to a boat, and she had been sexually assaulted on the boat, and then she had been thrown overboard at some place in the Boston Harbor, maybe even a little bit farther out at sea, but that was not true. She was found buried in the ground. The major theories out there involving the murder of Joan Webster are that the authorities, that is, the police officers, the state troopers, and the district attorney's office, believe that she was a victim of the serial killer Leonard Paradiso, Leonard the Quahog Paradiso, which I have to reinforce is a terrible nickname for a serial killer, but he was adamantly denying that he murdered Joan Webster, as well as also murdering the other woman that he was convicted of, and that was the 1979 murder of Marie Iannuzzi, who was found strangled in a marshy area near Lynn, Massachusetts. Joan Webster was not strangled, though. I mean, if you're going to look at anything pattern-based, she was killed with blunt force trauma, but because it had been nearly 9.5 years since she had disappeared, I mean, her remains had been in the ground for so long, other possible pieces of evidence were just simply lost, and we don't know if she was stabbed at any point, or that she may have had other types of lacerations, or there may have been some other cause of death associated with the murder of Joan Webster. But she was definitely struck in the head, and as of today, the authorities believe that she was killed with blunt force trauma. So then, if she wasn't killed by the serial killer Leonard Paradiso, I mean, I'm not going in any direction, who are the other suspects? Gareth Penn was a very adamant believer that Joan Webster was murdered by the Zodiac Killer, and that the Zodiac Killer was named Michael Henry O'Hare, the subject of his book Time 17, and that Michael O'Hare was committing this series of murders in California from 1966 to 1969, and then he also murdered Joan Webster, who was an architecture student, the way Michael O'Hare had been an architecture student, who went to Harvard the way Michael O'Hare went to Harvard, and this ties into some numerical patterns involving the number 17 and the number 38. 38 was the old zoning code for Cambridge, Massachusetts, where Joan Webster went to Harvard, and it's also in the current zip code 02138. Gareth Penn also goes on to become a suspect himself. He talks about this in the book Time 17, as well as other people, perhaps Ray Grant and Joe from the Zodiac Killer Insights series, heavily look at Joan Webster as a possible Zodiac Killer victim. I emphasize the word possible, but what they do believe is that Gareth Penn had an active role in the Zodiac Killer murders. So then he goes on to become a suspect. There's another book out there called Mommy's a Mole, which is about how Joan Webster's family, her parents, had connections to the CIA. It is written by Eve Carson, who is the sister-in-law of Joan Webster, whom I regularly correspond with. And Eve Carson has even gone as far as saying that her own father, George Webster, may actually have been a suspect in the murder of his daughter. And this is covered in some of the earlier episodes, but I wanted to share this because, to be very clear, Eve Carson believes in a police cover-up, and that it's possible that her own father is that bearded man who went to a certain level to disguise his appearance, mostly just acting very disheveled. But who would this 25-year-old woman get into a car with? Would she just accept a ride from an illegal taxi driver whom she had never met before, this guy Leonard Paradiso? Or would she accept the ride from someone whom was very familiar with her, someone whom she would trust? And I mean, I just wanted to put that forward, that this was her suspect. To get some counterbalance on this, what I decided to do was I contacted Tim Burke, who is the author of the book The Paradiso Files, serial killer Leonard Paradiso, as well as being the prosecutor in Paradiso's trial. Tim Burke is a very adamant believer that Joan Webster was indeed murdered by Paradiso, and I would like to read off the comment that Tim Burke provided me with. The first point is that I asked him if he would like to be interviewed on the show, and he turned down my request for an interview, but of course I wasn't satisfied with that, so I simply said, "Can I at least get one comment from you?" And what he shared with me was right here. As far as a comment, Paradiso openly bragged about killing both Marie Iannuzzi in 1979 and Joan Webster in 1981, while awaiting trial for the murder of Marie Iannuzzi. Mr. Paradiso provided details of how he committed both murders to two individuals, who then provided significant corroborative evidence in the case that could have come from no other source than Paradiso. The jury also heard extensive evidence about other suspects at Mr. Paradiso's trial. There is no question in my mind that Paradiso and he alone was responsible for the deaths of Marie Iannuzzi and Joan Webster. Best regards, Tim Burke. I shared this with Eve Carson, who is the author of the book Mommy's a Mole, as I said, and a former family member of Joan Webster. And her response was that the two individuals that he is talking about that could have provided this damning evidence against Leonard Paradiso are named Robert Bond and Ralph Anthony Pisa, and they were both felons convicted of murder. Now, even just looking at this, I mean, we were talking about this recently on the Anything Goes segment last Friday with the murder of Dorca Lisker, and how the suspect in that one, Bruce Lisker, her adoptive son, was placed in what is called a snitch tank, where people are trying to extract information out of other people, and then they're going to try and rat somebody out. They're trying to snitch on them in return for a lighter prison sentence. Whatever Robert Bond and Ralph Anthony Pisa were actually thinking of, I can't really say that. I'm not a psychic or a mind reader. But I would like to look at Eve Carson's next comment here, which says, Burke claimed in the past that those comments were made by the two witnesses that made his case. His allegations were false. The information Bond provided was information known to the police. His interview even describes slipping on the rocks on the bank of the Pine River. That statement was made by Trooper Rick Freilich, who was one of the first responders on the scene for the murder of Marie Iannuzzi. And yes, Marie Iannuzzi was found near the banks of the Pine River. In some sources, it's described as a marsh-like area near Lynn, Massachusetts. Even with police input, Robert Bond still got things mixed up, and the police would have known that. If you believe Paradiso committed the murders, then you would suggest the information could only have come from Paradiso. Paradiso was not the only person Bond was talking to. He was talking to Tim Burke, Trooper Andrew Palumbo, and Carmen Tamaro. The manner of Joan's death with correct detail is in Robert Bond's statements. That information is known only to the killer or someone complicit in the crime. Knowing for a fact that Bond's allegations were false on numerous points, he is not reliable. The information about Joan's manner of death comes logically from Palumbo and Tamaro. It explains why they aggressively tried to pin this on Paradiso. Now, there appears to be a bit of a difference between the 1979 murder of Maria Iannuzzi and the 1981 murder of Joan Webster. From corresponding with Eve Carson, in 1979, what her theory is on what happened is that Maria Iannuzzi was murdered by her own boyfriend at the time, who was named David Doyle, and that he had a friend in law enforcement named Andrew Palumbo, this trooper that I've been talking about just now, and he went to him, probably said something to the effect of, "Hey, we got into a really big fight, I just snapped, I lost control, I did something really bad," and then Palumbo helped David Doyle cover it up, and the way they ended up covering this up was blaming it on the serial killer Leonard Paradiso. And Eve Carson has also shared with me that she does not believe that Paradiso actually murdered anyone. Was he guilty of other crimes, such as rape? Yes. Insurance fraud? Yes, as well as all sorts of other felonies or criminal behavior up and down the spectrum. But was he actually guilty of these murders that they tried to blame him on? And Tim Burke has gone on the record to say that he believes that Paradiso murdered at least a half a dozen women, at least 6 women. But I would like to continue with Eve Carson's comment here. Ralph Pisa is no more reliable. I'm adding some things about him. Pisa was known as Death Row Tony. He was once on death row for murdering a security guard in 1969. Massachusetts dropped the penalty. Pisa studied in prison. He came to be known as a jailhouse lawyer. He helped inmates with appeals, including Paradiso for his conviction on the 1973 assault. Pisa crawled out of the woodwork when Bond's allegations hit the airwaves. Massachusetts had a furlough system for prisoners, in my opinion, a really bad idea that let felons out for long weekends. Bond benefited from the program, and so did Ralph Anthony Pisa. After Pisa came forward, Middlesex County greased the wheels. Pisa said that he would testify unless he was out of jail. He said, yes, that he would testify if he was out of jail. He did testify later, and he made assurances to George Webster. That seems to break all protocols. Middlesex moved Pisa to pre-release the facility. The day after he testified in the Iannuzzi pretrial hearing, Burke pleaded to get him out of any controlled environment, and Pisa walked out. He testified at the Iannuzzi trial. After that, Pisa was allowed to change his plea for his own conviction. He was given a lesser charge. This is that whole sort of snitch tank theory that seems to be present. And the judge determined his sentence was time served already. Pisa got a sweet deal. Here's what Pisa claimed. He was on furlough over Christmas in 1979. He was at the home of an attorney. He helped get new clients. Paradiso knew the lawyer as well. He arranged for a polygraph for Paradiso after Maria Iannuzzi's murder. Paradiso passed the examination. I have a copy of the check he paid as a retainer for the lawyer. Paradiso stopped by the lawyer's house with a bucket of lobsters as a gift on Christmas Eve, 1979. And Leonard Paradiso was a fisherman, as well as someone who regularly sold shellfish. Oh my goodness, that's a hard thing to say. She sells seashells by the seashore. He regularly sold shellfish to people, but so that doesn't sound abnormal to me at all that he would give somebody a bucket of lobsters. And Ralph Anthony Pisa claimed 2 men stepped out on the porch and Paradiso begged him to get the attorney to represent him. That he murdered Marie Iannuzzi. It is really a ludicrous suggestion. He needed help retaining a lawyer. He had already retained a couple months before. There was absolutely no way to verify Pisa's statement. So I think you can get the idea about Eve Carson's theory on what happened. In short, she does not believe those comments made by the prosecuting attorney Tim Burke that Leonard Paradiso bragged to anybody. In short, she is saying that that is simply a fabrication, more or less, or that they were really trying to get Paradiso convicted. It could be the police cover-up, or simply that the district attorney's office wants to close the case and get a conviction in something that was rather high profile. And as I've been reading more about the murder of Joan Webster, I can see that it was very sensationalized by the Boston media in the 1980s, the disappearance of Joan Webster and the discovery of her remains in 1990. And that's also another reason why I think that Gareth Penn would have latched onto the story and connected it to Michael Henry O'Hare, his Zodiac killer suspect. But I also wanted to be very clear that there are people, I mean, you heard that Tim Burke has a very different story than that of Eve Carson, but I wanted to read off another comment during this Q&A session, and this comes to us from Joe, who runs the Zodiac Killer Insights series. That's the name of his YouTube channel, and how he was commenting. This was left on the episode, The Murder of Joan Webster, A Dark Family Secret, and it's also exploring the theory that Eve Carson has that one or both of her parents may have been involved in the murder and disappearance of Joan Webster. And the reason that has been mentioned throughout that episode is Eve Carson believes that Joan had knowledge of a dark family secret, a felony that had been committed by one of the Websters, and that her own father may have had her set up for murder. And let's just read Joe's comment here. This is, once again, under the handle, the Zodiac Killer Insight series, which you can watch on YouTube. He also has a video about the murder of Joan Webster. So, Miss Carson, it seems that we have here an individual, that is you, who doesn't particularly enjoy being challenged, contradicted, or attacked. In your mind, it's perfectly acceptable to dish out the dirty laundry, but when the roles are reversed, all hell breaks loose. I hope you're not about to sue me for disagreeing with your conclusions, much the same way you sued Stacy Palumbo for defamation. Stacy Palumbo, of course, connected to Andrew Palumbo. Stacy Palumbo is a relative of the deceased trooper Andrew Palumbo, who died in a motorbike accident, and someone Eve Carson categorically claims was involved in Joan's murder. According to case number 49A02-1312-PL-105, you, Eve Carson, sued Stacy Palumbo for defamation per se, for the amount of, just under $60,000. It's actually $59,882.88. I don't know why I felt the need to censor that. I can just say that. After Stacy told you, Eve Carson, to stop attacking Lieutenant Andrew Palumbo, who had since passed away, and accused you, Eve, of being an angry ex-wife whose kids have been taken from her, for good reasons. As I stated in one of my earlier comments, there are always three sides to the story. In this case, there's your side, the truth, and their side. Nevertheless, less than a year later, that's what it does say, nevertheless, less than a year later, Eve filed a defamation suit against Stacy Palumbo. Wow, are you for real? Talk about the pot calling the kettle black. It takes some nerve and guile, if you ask me. The law states that you cannot sue a dead person. However, in your mind, it's perfectly okay to slander a dead individual. As you can hear very clearly, Joe does not believe the police cover-up theory. And when a relative or dead person vents their frustrations regarding your continued attacks, claiming you're an angry ex-wife whose kids have been taken, you sue her for the defamation totaling $59,882.88. You've got to be kidding me, right? It's all about you, isn't it, Eve? You're a wealth of knowledge, and only you have the answers to Joan's murder, right? No one can contradict you nor challenge you in any way, shape, or form. I love the part where you state, it was important for me, that's Eve, to understand the effects of abuse, specifically to understand psychological and emotional abuse. What about the abuse you were dishing out toward a deceased individual who can't come back from his grave to defend himself? Not only were you defaming him, but you were also defaming the Palumbo family. How do you look in the mirror? And in regards to Andrew Palumbo, the trooper who has been involved here, I've noticed some different things that come from Eve Carson, and that is that it doesn't have to be the case, that Andrew Palumbo had done anything lethal or fatal to Joan Webster. What I more or less understand from Eve Carson, that her standpoint now is that he may have been involved in some type of cover-up with the deaths of Marie Iannuzzi and the death of Joan Webster, but did he actually murder anybody? No, and not that Joe was even writing it off in that comment there, but rather just being very clear. He has been accused by Eve Carson of being an active participant in the cover-up. And when it comes to looking at a suspect in the murder of Joan Webster, Eve Carson also doesn't exactly say that George Webster murdered her or delivered the fatal blow. It could have been somebody else. As it is my understanding that she states that he could have been the person who set her up for murder, once again guarding some type of dark family secret that may have come out. As gruesome as it is to think of a father murdering his own daughter, or having his daughter set up for murder, rather, I mean, must have been a very, very evil secret, but there is that type of evil in the world, and let's not all pretend that that isn't there. But it is important to note, and I think this is what Joe's comment is really getting at. Andrew Palumbo was never charged with these crimes, okay? But Leonard Paradiso was also never charged with the murder of Joan Webster. The district attorney, or assistant district attorney, former prosecutor Tim Burke, who is now in private practice, heavily believed that Leonard Paradiso murdered Joan Webster. You heard very clearly in that email, there is no question in his mind. He is guilty of the Iannuzzi murder, and he's guilty of Joan Webster's murder. Eve Carson also wants to point out that I think that there is some stability in her case to look at how these jailhouse informants that we were talking about to begin the session are maybe not the most reliable people in the world. Eve Carson also did attach a particular document. It was a transcript, not coming from Ralph Anthony Pisa, but from the other person that was in question, Robert Bond. And there's a very particular line in there when he says that if this blows up, this is on you. And that could be interpreted in two different directions. You could look at that as someone saying, hey, I'm going along with the story that you're saying, but if this blows up, you guys have to deal with the consequences. But I'm sure most lawyers would listen to something like that, and then they would say, I'm telling you what somebody told me, and if this blows up on you and it turns out that it's not valuable information, I've kept up my side of the deal. And so there's a little bit of gray area with the comments that have been made by Robert Bond, the other jailhouse informant, the other, I'm tempted to say snitch once again, that have been on the record. But if we expand that, Eve Carson has had a private investigator interview Robert Bond, and something that she has shared previously is that she does not believe that he had the mental faculties to compose a wild story like this, and that he was most likely coached by people, Carmen Tomorrow and Andrew Palumbo. But it's good to hear the different sides of the story. The next comment, also on that episode, The Murder of Joan Webster, A Dark Family Secret, was Eve Carson's rebuttal to Joe from the Zodiac Killer Insight series. Eve writes, apparently, you do not have the answers to the questions raised by source documents. Source documents verifiably prove Palumbo hid exculpatory evidence. Source documents prove that Palumbo filed false documents with the court. He obstructed justice in the murder of my family member. Just how do you explain Palumbo and Tomorrow knowing the correct manner of death, and with correct detail, more than 7 years before her remains surfaced? They put forward a false witness whose allegations were debunked. I am a family member, a victim of the hoax that was perpetrated. I have personal knowledge living through these experiences. I know people involved. I spent 15 years digging out the actual records to understand what was going on. As new pieces of information were recovered, the scope narrowed. I've been going through this case when someone could not answer the questions, and the typical fallback is to shoot the messenger. And as far as this one line in here about knowing the correct manner of Joan Webster's death, that she was killed with blunt force trauma, for the longest time the authorities are going with this public image that Joan Webster had been murdered by Leonard Paradiso, that he had taken her on his boat, and that he had dumped her either in the Boston Harbor or in somewhere out at sea, that she had been buried at sea, but her body was then found on land. But she was killed with blunt force trauma. And if I've understood Eve Carson's narrative, it's that Robert Bond, the jailhouse snitch informant, provided this information, but if he didn't actually get it from Leonard Paradiso, he could have obtained it from Carmen Tomorrow or Andrew Palumbo. I'm sure attorneys would be able to tackle that one as well. I mean, it's a more or less a possibility because this is an unsolved case, but you can see where Eve Carson is going at that. This is the origin of she believes that the origin of that information was Andrew Palumbo and Carmen Tomorrow. So is this open for debate and discussion? And I would like to anybody who wants to weigh in on the murder of Joan Webster to share something in the comments section here. If there's anything that you think that makes sense, if you thought that the prosecutor Tim Burke was completely right about everything, please put your idea in the comment section below. If you do not believe Eve Carson's theory, you can put that in the comment section below. Or if you do agree with Eve that a police cover-up did take place, I would also hope that you would share that. Please discuss this. Play any side if you want, or share what you genuinely believe about the 1981 murder of Joan Webster or the 1979 murder of Marie Iannuzzi. And Marie Iannuzzi is also mentioned in Gareth Penn's book, Time 17 as well. There's a short thing on her, and a much larger section on the murder of Joan Webster, which we have read off in a previous episode. I would invite everybody to once again listen to the playlist on the entire murder of Joan Webster. Now, Joe has written a response to Eve Carson's comment there on the same episode, and that is that, regardless of what you may have in source documents, Mr. Palumbo has not been prosecuted in a court of law. You have prosecuted him in your own kangaroo court of opinion. Moreover, I will leave it up to you to look in the mirror and decide what these big issues are, and do you feel sorry for me? ? No thanks. I've said in the past thus far that all we have is your side of the story. I would love to listen to the other side of the story. And I think we covered that one in the beginning, that Tim Burke, the prosecutor, believes that the allegations are true against Leonard Paradiso. He believes that the information came from the jailhouse snitches, or at the very least, he is going forward with that in the public image. That is what he has shared with me, and Eve Carson is simply saying he's absolutely full of crap. That is just a blatant lie. And my impression was that when I contacted Tim Burke's contact info, for lack of a better term, at first there was no response, and then I called into a number that had been provided for him online, and he turned down the interview. But when he said that he gave that small comment there, I thought that either this is something that he does genuinely believe, or this is a chapter in his life that he no longer cares to discuss. I was speaking to his personal assistant, and she said she was surprised that I wanted to interview him about his book, The Paradiso Files. No one had called about the book in a long time. She couldn't even tell me the fee that he would charge for media interviews. So I think that it could be one or the other, maybe both, that he believes Paradiso is guilty. He no longer wants to talk about this material. He wants to just put it behind himself and move on to something else. Or it could be a combination of both. But the objective of this episode was to share many different sides of the story and some comments that had been left on the YouTube channel. But you did hear in that comment directly from the prosecutor that he believes Paradiso murdered both Marie Iannuzzi and Joan Webster. After I shared that with Eve Carson, she has sent me this message here that says, "Hi Ned, the Massachusetts State Police transferred Joan's files to Essex County after her remains surfaced in their jurisdiction. Those files contained eyewitness reports and a composite. It is not reasonable to think that Tim Burke never saw that. The man seen with Joan was much smaller than Leonard Paradiso. Getting into a second vehicle meant that there was a person driving that car. Right out of the gate, Tim Burke is disingenuous with his comment. Tim Burke lied about having a letter to set up an interview with Massachusetts State Police. It was mailed 5 days after Burke claims he received it. Excerpts from the Massachusetts State Police interview on January 14th, it says 1/14/83, January 14th, 1983, confirms that when the Massachusetts State Police interviewed Robert Bond, that's the jailhouse snitch, he did not know the manner of death and told Tomorrow and Palumbo they could choose. He appeared to be getting his stories mixed up during the January 14th interview in 1983. Robert Bond did not know where Paradiso had his boat and told Tomorrow and Palumbo that it was on them if it went wrong during the interview. Tomorrow introduced the officers present in the interview, and Bond told Tomorrow and Palumbo he could get Paradiso to say anything involved with entrapment. Carmen tomorrow suggested the boat theory, that is that Joan Webster was buried at sea on August 1st of 1982, more than 4 months before he led Bond through the interview. This is documented in a letter from Paradiso to someone named Jimmy, believed to be his attorney. Robert Bond met with Carmen Tomorrow on January 10th, 1983, after his sentencing for the Mary Foreman murder. Tomorrow identifies himself in a prior meeting during the January 14th interview. Both meetings on the 10th and the 14th took place before Tim Burke received a letter from Robert Bond, and both meetings took place after Robert Bond was transferred out of the Charles Street Jail on December 29th of 1982. Robert Bond no longer had any contact with Leonard Paradiso when these meetings took place. The excerpt is from the Iannuzzi trial on the 16th of July defense, and the counsel named was Stephen Rappaport. So, okay, you might be wondering something. Even if the district attorney's office, the state troopers, law enforcement, all right, they want to push this narrative for whatever reason, why does that implicate the parents, the family members of Joan Webster? How would they be implicated in their own daughter's disappearance and murder? It's a question that I have. It's a question that everybody would have. Even if you recognize that there is evil in the world, I mean, that's some pretty dark stuff. Having your own daughter either murdered or set up for murder or doing something that would lead to the circumstances in which she died. I mean, all of that is absolutely as evil as it can get. It's just, how would you phrase the legal charges that would be placed against the Websters, both of whom have passed away? And I wanted to know more about that, and Eve Carson responded to me when I asked that question, and she said, "Hi, Ned. When I started digging into Joan Webster's case, I took the blinders off and looked at everyone, including the Websters. Her case cannot be resolved without looking at what they did. Without question, George and Eleanor Webster were knowingly part of a cover-up. They had the exculpatory evidence in hand and knew Paradiso was not the killer. As much as I hate to go there, George is a suspect. I cannot cross him off the list. There is no reasonable or loving explanation for the father of a brutally slain daughter to promote a false story. He kept the inner circle small. Tim Burke, Andrew Palumbo, and Carmen Tomorrow all played a part. So any part George had was not acting. The eyewitness lead does indicate another person, the driver of the second car in the cab line. I have known the Websters for many years and went through every day of this nightmare with them." Eve Carson is the sister-in-law of Joan Webster, was saying that one more time. "They were not honest with me about a missing murdered member of my family. That is an enormous betrayal of trust. I would be greatly relieved if there was a reasonable explanation provided for their behaviors, and I remain open to it. But I also know that they do have the capacity. Think about it. It makes for a near-perfect crime for rogue law enforcement and a rogue prosecutor to aid and abet the father of a victim with a lot of clout. I can go into some of these specifics about how they reacted to my questions. That might make for a good episode. It's a side of the family that most people do not know, and that will most likely be the next episode in this series on the murder of Joan Webster. If anyone hasn't subscribed yet, now's a good time to do that, and you can follow along with this one, as well as everything on Zodiac Mondays, the Wednesday AMA, the Anything Goes segment on Friday, but really to zone in on these segments that have been coming out on the weekend about the murder of Joan Webster, as well as Maria Iannuzzi and the other victims who were allegedly murdered by Leonard Paradiso. Leonard Paradiso was sentenced to life in prison for the 1979 murder of Maria Iannuzzi. He was implicated in the other murders, but he was convicted and sentenced for the Iannuzzi murder, and that's one of the reasons why Tim Burke titled his book The Paradiso Files, talking about Boston's unknown serial killer. So I think you can see where Eve Carson is going with this, as well as both Joe and Tim Burke. Tim Burke believes that Paradiso was guilty. Joe does not buy the police cover-up theory. But one of the individuals that we haven't talked too much about in this episode is Gareth Penn. And just from reading a lot of the source documents that Eve Carson has shared with me, there was a lot of media coverage around the murder of Joan Webster. And she simply believes that Gareth Penn was played by the Websters, that you had this guy who is researching the Zodiac Killer. He's trying to write a book about the Zodiac Killer, which came out in 1987, nearly 6 years after the murder of Joan Webster. But she simply says that the Websters played him. They corresponded with him and they communicated with him frequently, and they're feeding him a pack of slimy lies, more or less, if I understand her narrative. But what do you think happened to Joan Webster? Do you think she was murdered by the Zodiac Killer? Do you think that she was murdered by the serial killer Leonard Paradiso, and that you accept what the prosecution has put forward? Or do you believe that she was set up by somebody else, maybe even a member of her own family? Or even option D, something totally different? I would love to hear from you. Please share anything that you are even curious about in the comments section below. What is your response to everything that we have been putting forward here? And this episode, once again, was meant to show the different sides of the story, to hear what different people are putting forward as their theory and as to what happened to Joan Webster in 1981. Okay, that's all from me now. And one more time, you can hit the like button and subscribe if you like what you hear. And anybody can write the show at BlackBoxOnlineRadio@AOL.com. You can also follow me on Facebook. There's a link in the description box. And BlackBoxNet88 on Instagram is another way to keep in touch. And I will see you on Instagram for the bonus podcast. Until next time.